Welcome to the DevReady Podcast. My name is Andrew Romeo and my co-host Anthony Sapunzis joined me today. We interviewed Brian Ruddle. Now, Brian Ruddle is from Impact Innovation, a business where he's been running for about 13 years now, helping startups and also corporates with their innovation processes and strategies. Brian's been involved in the startup world where he's started up over 4 companies and also now helping and advising on different startups as well. One of the things that Brian said to me when I first met him was around ID complexity. How we can sometimes think about an idea or the problem we're trying to solve and focus in on that and not understand really the full gamut of what we really need to know around our ideas and even our business models and how we're going to drive those into the marketplace. Today we had a really good chat to Brian around what are the key components of an idea and the complexity in the business models, and we took a deep dive into each of those components. I think it was about 10 to 15 of these components. So have a good listen. And some of these, the idea of this is understanding where your gaps lie if you're in startup worlds or if you're in new product development, knowing where to look next and to fill in those assumptions that you may have. Enjoy the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
I appreciate that. Now, Brian, you're from Impact Innovation. Now, tell us a bit about Impact Innovation and what you're all about.
Yeah, sure. So we've been going for a bit over 13 years now. Mm-hmm. We started off doing a lot of work with startup companies, particularly out of research organisations like universities and the like, and then started moving more and more into corporate innovation. So now we've grown to a team of about 25.
Okay.
We operate across the Asia Pacific region, and so we do a lot of things around innovation systems for large corporates. That's around how they find ideas, how they assess them, how they actually turn them into new products and services and processes.
Yes.
We do a lot of commercialization still with startups and universities. We work a lot with government agencies on designing new programs.
Okay.
And then a lot of skills development work as well. So it's varied.
It is.
I suppose that the key focus though is it has to be new to market type things that we do.
Okay, so it can be new to market, still in startup land, or in the corporate world. So where would you say you're spending most of your time at the moment? Is it 50-50 or what does that look like percentage-wise?
It's probably close to 50-50.
Okay.
It varies. We're getting a lot more interest on corporate innovation at the moment, mainly because we're very focused on practical outcomes.
Okay.
So I suppose a lot of corporates are starting to move away from some people call it theatre, we call it innovation gambling.
Gambling,
where they just sort of throw, it's like going to the casino. People are just throwing money at innovation, hoping for an outcome. Whereas what we can do is show them that you can put a system in place to reduce risk and actually get an outcome that's going to add value to the business.
Okay, interesting. System, what's an example of a system that you might put in place?
Yeah, so it can be around, I suppose, where you're going to find ideas, how you're going to assess ideas, how you engage with team members to bring together validation, or proof of concept teams.
Yes.
Budget. So there's a whole range of things. There's actually So there's innovation standards, innovation management standards currently being brought together. So there's 43 countries that have been working on that. I'm actually chair of the Australian committee that's involved with bringing together these international innovation management standards.
Okay.
And it's like a lot of other things. It's putting systems in place to drive outcomes, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Will that be standards that will be used to help people get certified? Or
Probably
is it
not.
more just things like industry standards to follow and guidelines and rules rather than a certification?
Yeah, it's not like the ISO 9000 or a lot of other standards. It's more trying to, I suppose, put a benchmark in place around how systems can drive outcomes.
Okay.
And to encourage organisations to focus on the systems rather than just running a hackathon or doing something in an ad hoc sort of way. The intent isn't that they're going to be compliance standards, but they're guiding standards.
Okay. Very good. So how long have you had that role for? What does it sort of look like?
It's only really recent. So Australia was a bit of a latecomer to the whole process. So the committee was formed late last year. And so I was asked if I'd like to chair the committee. And so we actually have our second committee meeting tomorrow.
Oh, very nice.
But there's a lot of things happening. There's three standards that have been published, international standards that have been published so far. There's about another 5 that are in development. So it'll be interesting, and it's going to add a lot of value to corporates that are doing innovation. For our startup clients, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't link in, but it's part of building this innovation ecosystem, though.
No, I understand that. See, and we've been involved in it, like corporates attempting to invest in new technology, and like you said, they might throw money at a hackathon, they might group together some things, but then those ideas generally go nowhere because it's just a one-off thing that they do, and it's not a continuous thing they're building into their model. So something like that may impact the way people approach it moving forward. What outcomes are you looking to deliver from that?
So look, I suppose part of it is the professionalisation of innovation. So that it moves past the we like playing with shiny new things element to we're doing innovation to drive profitability and growth of our business type approaches.
Yeah, it's more of getting really strategic about innovation, not just something you do at an ad hoc experience. Yeah, very good. That's really good background about who you are and where you sort of come from, and Impact Innovation obviously been around for a little while now, 13 years, so quite a bit of experience and team that you would have. So we're obviously about DevReady Podcast. It's about helping non-techs build better products. So what we wanted to talk to you about today was around idea development and what that actually means. Now, you've worked on a model that you've built over time with your customers. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So it came about probably about 8 months or so ago now. We were talking to a lot of our clients, and we were talking about, I suppose, the complexity around turning an idea or a research outcome into a product or service. And you were getting a lot of blank looks.
Blank looks.
It was actually, it was hard because often you're talking to people, whether they're startup founders or within a corporate environment, that have never done it before. So you start talking about the complexity, and it's hard to grasp, well, what could go wrong? What are the key things to look out for? And so what we ended up doing is we built a complexity diagram, and we went and had our part of the team, we sat down and we started looking at, well, where were we seeing a lot of client projects going off the rails, and where did we see non-clients completely go off the rails, and started to sort of identify, if you like, key areas that anyone, whether they're a startup founder or, as I said, within a corporate environment or within a government environment, if they're trying to turn an idea into something tangible, just to give them some guidance about what to look out for, not just one time, but continuously through the whole process.
And you mentioned continuously through the whole process. Now, innovation is not a one-time thing. It's generally something you're continuously doing. So how did you frame that model with your clients, and what sort of areas does it dive into?
Yeah, so the framing is more around, I suppose, project management, and that the operating environment that you're working in is constantly changing. So, and I'll talk a bit about the model in a moment, but just to give one example, let's say an understanding of where competitors are at. You might think you know that now, but in 6 months' time, that could completely change. There could be new competitor products on the market. There could be changes in legislation. There could be a whole range of other things that could come into play, that if you're not constantly scanning and checking, you might say, oh, yep, I've ticked the box, I've checked on competitors, or I've checked on regulatory, everything's sweet. But you can get to the end and you might have spent a heck of a lot more time and money, and you've got a product that isn't going to compete for whatever reason or isn't going to work. So a lot of this is constantly, good project management skills, constantly checking, looking at what could go wrong and making sure that you've got, as many facts as you possibly can.
Yeah, so you mentioned facts as you possibly can, but like you said, I think we can all get a little bit lost around building a business model right at the beginning, or a business plan, for example, and then, all right, this is the idea we're working on, and you do SWOT analysis, you do competitor analysis, you use those basic metrics, but I think checking in continuously is a good insight for some people that don't do that, so they might do it at the start. We've heard stories of people that are building product and then they basically had to stop because there was a product release that was basically 5-10 times ahead of where they were, and they basically were never going to catch up. So sometimes, keep your eye out. It's a very interesting insight there.
It's always having a look and assessing. So we see it from just the software side. Mm-hmm. If they're using the Agile framework, you need to be able to constantly assess and evaluate where things are going.
Yes.
And not just be flexible for the sake of being flexible because you're using the term Agile.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. And that's it. And this is something we say to a lot of clients, because Agile, lean startup, all of these terms are constantly used. But Agile doesn't mean that you don't have a plan, that you don't check on things.
Correct.
It's not, as you wake up, you decide to do something different. That's not what it means.
Correct.
It's having a plan and a direction and just constantly adjusting that course.
Yes.
Exactly.
I think there's a perception out there what Agile actually means. I don't think people get it. Like Agile, ability to change. All it means is you've got the ability to change, and that's like you check in, right? So I think that's the important point that you've raised there.
Yeah. So I suppose some of the things that we talk to a lot of our clients about with this model are things like ongoing customer insights. Are you constantly identifying those customer insights, but also understanding where you're getting those insights from. A lot of people have seen the innovation adoption curve. You got your innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards in a bell curve.
Yes.
And you need to understand where you're getting your feedback from. Are you getting customer feedback from innovators who like playing with shiny new things? Are you getting feedback from a late majority type client and trying to understand what it is they're wanting in an end product? And so we talk to a lot of people about understanding where you're getting the information from, not just going with those that, again, as I said, if you go with those that like playing with shiny new things, you'll often end up building something that the majority of the market just doesn't want or doesn't need.
A very interesting point there.
You don't want to respond to the noisy minority.
Yes.
Correct.
This is a term I've read online, yeah. And I'm guessing that information would probably start with them initially because they're who you have got on board. And then that where you're getting the information would adjust as the curve changes as well.
That's correct. Yep, that's exactly it. And it's just being aware of, constantly expanding the horizon a little bit, because the bell curve is really important, because your innovators are a really small market, or a small percentage, if you like, of the total market that you're going for. You want the middle part, the early majority, late majority. And so at some particular point in time, you need to start listening to those people around what do they actually need.
When would you start that? Because, like Anthony sort of alluded to, you're going to be really working with the innovators. Those very early adopters are going to take on the product. How do you touch upon those other people? Really, those late majority could be people that have got no interest in something new at all. Probably don't ever want to have a conversation about something new. So, what sort of angles could you try to tap into that market?
Yeah, look, and it's hard. And again, I've been involved with a number of startups. I've founded 4 of them and things like that. And often when you're getting customer insights, you're looking for people that agree with you.
Yes, which is
because you're trying to build evidence.
Yes,
if you like. Yeah, and it's a natural tendency, but sometimes it's really good to find out why people don't like what you're doing.
Get it?
And so we often talk to people about sort of really understanding what does no mean. So, so let's say you're talking to a potential, customer group, and they say, no, we think your idea won't work. Well, if you leave it at that, then you're not really gaining much in the way of insights, because you don't know whether no means I had a crap night's sleep and I really don't have the time to talk to you today, or no, we've already just put in a new system and there's no way in the world we're going to change.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if you don't start delving down into if you don't delve into the no, it's hard to get those insights.
Yeah, so that's probably a good thing for anyone listening out there, is to ask why and dive into whatever the answer is. Even if it is yes, they could just be saying yes just to get you to be quiet. It's the same result as a no.
It doesn't mean they're going to use your product.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And so it's those customer insights are really important. But as I said, it's working out, well, where are they coming from? How do they fit within your target market? But then understanding what those insights are.
It's always an interesting one. It's all about those asking. I've heard this many times. The 5 whys, the root reason why. So you might ask why the first time they don't want to use it. Oh, just not interested in a new product. And then you might dig in further. Oh, last time we had a new product, it all failed. And then you might start learning about their experiences the more you can dig in. But it's all about building that rapport with your customer too, that you're potentially talking to.
No, exactly.
Very good.
Yeah, so another thing that we talk to a lot of people about is around adoption costs, or I suppose another way of terming that is the perceived value that customers are getting out of a particular product. And I suppose we use the example in a workshop environment a lot of if I was a brand new telco and I could save the people in the room 10% off their personal mobile phone bills, how many people would change? And in a workshop situation, say you've got 30 people in the room, you might end up with 1 or 2 people. And then I say, well, okay, what if I could save you 20%? And you might get a few more, and then 30%, you generally get a lot more again.
Okay.
And we sort of use that as an example in a workshop setting, just to drive home that, depending on the product or the service, but 10% often doesn't cut it. The value that people perceive versus the cost of change really has a marked impact in terms of whether someone will change, adopt something new and change the way that they're doing things.
So if it's a lot of effort to go through something, that's a high cost.
Yes, to them, they perceive it as a cost, right? And the more, and we're talking about just changing your phone, right? I don't think I've changed my phone provider in about 6 or 7 years, and a 10% cost isn't going to impact me either, just because that works, they're doing a good job, and my phone works all the time. So very interesting point around perception of what it costs to move, because I think people don't like change. No one likes change, and if it's a minimal output or value, then you're not going to get much people moving.
Yeah, and the thing that we talk to a lot of clients about with that is understanding risk from the customer's perspective.
Okay.
If the cost of the new product or service is $100, well, the risk profile, if they change, is probably going to be lower, and unless it impacts on other systems or other things that's of value to the individual. You get into some expensive plays, and we've seen a lot of enterprise software plays where they're talking $80,000, $100,000 licenses. That can mean people's jobs in terms of early adopters. If they take a punt and they give it a go and it doesn't work. It can have big consequences. So, if you're sitting in a corporate job and you're making those decisions and if all blows over, it can be back of that you haven't hit your KPIs, you've put our company at risk, and then all of a sudden, it's not a good position to be in. And it comes back to what we were talking about before. It's what does it take to change? And for an individual, it could be really simple. It's a new app or something like that, or it fixes a problem. And so the risk reward is in favour of change. You get into corporate environments and government environments. You might have a great bit of software or a new widget, but it's how does that fit into the overall system as well?
And so the cost...
the cost of adoption goes up quite significantly in a lot of cases because it impacts on other areas.
That's an interesting train of thought here. So when you're working, and I don't know about your startup experience, but if you're looking at different models, would you consider looking at if you could roll out your model to a corporate world and get 10, 20, 30 clients at 200-300K per annum? That's one option. Or could you consider trying to tweak your concept and idea to hit a mass market and reduce your cost? Obviously, that might be a safer play given what you're saying here.
Yeah, reduce the risk for all those customers potentially as well. If it's less cost, but depends on what it impacts.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like an operational tool or...
Yeah, it really depends on the product and where that nice fit is. And sometimes, and when we talk about adoption costs, often it's a case of talking to those early customers and even asking the basic question of how would you sell this to yourself? What are the key features? What's the value proposition, if you like, that you would sell to yourself? And it could be something it may be around ease of adoption. It may be price. It might be whatever. But yeah, sometimes people go for the big ticket items. Others go for, mass market. But it depends on the product or service and what they're trying to achieve as to where, which way it should go.
No, very interesting. Yeah, sort of concept around that. So I like the question around how would you sell to yourself, because I think when we dig in, I think that's a really good question around what, even when you go down to the level of what you're going to be building, we can design a concept, an idea, and then basically have 1,000,001 things we might want to throw into this thing. But a good question is, what do you need to be able to sell to yourself, and what features, what functions would be a great little place to start for some people thinking out there. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. Other things that we see, getting back to this complexity model, is just around IP issues, regulatory. We come across a lot of startups that try to take, if you like, the Uber approach of not caring that they're breaking the law.
Yeah, that's a good approach, isn't it? Uber's probably the only one that's done it. Yeah.
But they managed to get there, but it doesn't work for everyone. We've seen a lot of major failures because everyone thought that, we'll just keep ploughing ahead and things will change around us. But if they don't change, then the business is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's not viable.
I can think of a problem with that with those scooters and e-bikes that they try and roll out in the cities. Here in Victoria, you have to have a helmet to ride one of those, and that's probably why those things have failed. No one carries a helmet with them. No one wants to borrow someone else's helmet.
Yeah.
So that's where they're pushing people, hopefully break the law, but no one wants to get a fine
while riding a bike.
To risk riding a bike.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. No one's carrying a helmet in their back pocket, are they?
That's it.
Yeah.
And so where regulatory really starts to impact is when you start to grow. So you might be able to get away without it when you're small, but as soon as you start to try to get decent investment in, whether it's through VCs or angel groups or corporate investment, they're going to check on that regulatory, and you're going to have to comply. Otherwise, they'll see it as problematic. And the bigger thing is when you start looking at international markets, your IP and your regulatory, basically has to be market by market, and you need to understand what that looks like so that you've got the capital backing, the approach, and things like that to be able to grow.
Yeah, and you mentioned market by market. I think being in Australia, we can be in a little bit of a bubble and we can work within our own environments, but maybe some of us are not actually exploring what other opportunities are there, because there's so much opportunity in the Asia areas at the moment. I think you mentioned you're working in Asia Pacific. Yeah, you are. Yes, there's a lot of opportunity growing out of there, and obviously US is a monster over there. So
not just that, it also affects the product that you're developing as well, potentially, to be able to be flexible enough to cater for that.
Yep.
So, we've been in talks with a client recently, and they've got global expansion on their mind, but they haven't thought about how they're even going to roll that in Australia, let alone the other countries yet. They're that early of a stage, but they didn't think about like tax implications in selling things overseas, which is something they have to comply by.
Yeah, and particularly from your side, like from a build perspective, they're major considerations that if you need to build in how to handle, different VAT percentages, GST percentages, whatever, you want to be aware of, how to sort of build that into the system. So,
Yeah, a small change while from the surface might look simple or superficial, there can be a lot of stuff going underneath under the surface to make that look simple.
Yep.
So, it's always best to know up front.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a case of looking at regulatory and realising that other countries may be a bit easier to get into. We've had a few scenarios over the years where actually going through, say, the US regulatory system, I know this might sound weird, but is actually easier than going through the Australian for a particular type of product.
Interesting.
But it depends on what you're trying to do and where you're going. But where we've seen failure points is people not realising, even from a software perspective, that they should be going through, say, TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration, regulatory compliance, because it's in the health space or measurement space or whatever. And so it's really important that businesses really understand that.
Now, to understand that, where would they generally turn to? Who could be good advisors in that space? If they're basically, like you said, building a product in the health space. If you're not consuming, you wouldn't assume that would be the approach. But generally there could be, and there's data implications around that, from technical as to where that data's stored. If you go down a patient route, who should they be talking to around this sort of stuff?
Yeah. And look, a lot of us talking to people that are in the industry.
Okay.
And checking things out, like from an IP perspective, go to IP Australia, their website. If you're talking about regulatory, it could be anything from industry specific to the TGA. In the ag space, there's the what they call the APVMA, so the Australian Pesticide and Veterinary Medicine Authority. You've got food standards. So there's and then even from an overall standards perspective, Standards Australia have got all the standards around different widgets and things like that people need to be aware of. So it's a case of, I suppose, asking the question more than anything else, and then continually asking it to make sure that what you're building and what you're doing either complies or a path to compliance.
Get it?
Yeah, so that'll be trying to find specific legal counsel or industry-specific consultant or advisor that works with other companies to get most of the information.
Yeah, look, that's basically it. So say in fintech, talk to people that are playing in the fintech space and just ask, well, what are the regulatory considerations that we need to take into account? If it's in an engineering space, just ask the question, what do we need to take into account as we roll this thing out? And that's the problem. When you're talking to a lot of corporates, they just assume that everyone knows because they're in the game. So it's really a case of asking the question.
That's a good question. I think you mentioned, ask people in industry, because they're going to know who the regulatory advisor, who the boards are, what you need to comply to. They're going to have a rough idea, and at least they're going to set you on the path, right? All right, maybe look at this at least, and they'll give you some sort of direction. So, good point in terms of asking the people in the industry.
So another thing that we've been talking to a lot of companies about is around proof of concept data and what information they're actually trying to collect. So we see a lot of money being wasted on proof of concept and validation.
Being wasted in what way?
Because they focus on the wrong information they're collecting. So they might say, for example, you've got a widget and you're testing it out with the market as to whether it meets a market need. You can do that and you can spend a lot of time and effort on that. But if you're not collecting data on price point at the same time, you might have a perfect widget and they're all saying, yep, this is fantastic. But because you haven't actually tested out the, around the revenue model, for example, and tested that out, you've got a fantastic widget that meets everyone's requires, but no one's going to pay for it.
Get it? Understand. Yeah, so understanding all the facets of the business model before you just build a product. So it's not just, I think we can all get a little bit lost in the product and what it actually does too. and then not look around how the business model is going to operate, how we're going to actually make money from this. Is the customer actually going to part with their money to actually buy value from you? And that's probably bigger questions than the product itself. Are you solving a big enough problem for them to actually perceive value in what you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way that we tend to, I suppose, pitch it to a lot of our clients. It's thinking of what information, so with designing a proof of concept project, what sort of information do you need to collect to convince a customer, or if you're collecting information to convince an investor, but like what is it that you need to collect to convince them that it's worthwhile taking this thing forward? So often there's product and service features, but there's all of these other elements that come into play. And so part of it is sort of understanding what data needs to be collected and then collect that data as part of the proof of concept process.
So you would spend a bit of time obviously researching and digging into what data I should collect, not just going out and asking, is my product fantastic and will it solve your problem? Yeah, that's a good point, because we can jump ahead 3 or 4 steps, especially when we're caught up in an idea. Now, we all have our own ideas and we can get buy-in pretty easy, and we're probably our best salesmen to ourselves about our own concepts. So we're probably just pitching that and then talking to customers. So yeah, looking at the business model is a really good point, and then different areas around that.
Yeah, yep. And so that's sort of where we see, it's really important just to understand why, what is your, again, it's the data, but it's also, and I suppose it comes back to a broader thing around what is commercialization. So we tend to define it as just a process of replacing assumptions with facts. So you mentioned earlier on around the business model canvas. When you do one of those, essentially what you're doing is writing down a heap of assumptions.
Yes, that's what you're doing in a room. It's all coming out of your head, or a few people maybe, but not the market.
Yep. And so then the commercialization process is you're going through all of those elements and basically collecting evidence to back it all up. So I'll give an example. So we were doing some work with an ag startup, and we were targeting multinationals, and we knew we were going to have to do another capital raise.
Okay.
And that we needed to validate the revenue model, because I couldn't go to the investors for the next round saying, trust me, multinationals will pay.
Get it.
So we had an assumption around what the revenue model was going to be, but I needed facts. And so we actually put in place our proof of concept project was to do a couple of really early deals, and the whole focus of those deals was just to validate the revenue model.
Okay, so getting an understanding of if it's actually going to be paid for.
So that would be signing up actual customers, not just surveying if they'd be happy to pay X, Y, or Z.
Yep. And so with that, it wasn't the customer paying for the product. Like we had for that particular one, it was a collaborative research project, but we had it validated that if that project was successful, then this was the royalty rate that they would pay. So we weren't proving that we had revenues coming in, but I was proving that they had signed up to this agreement. And it was a step or two away from trust me, this will work.
If they've got an agreement to say they'll pay based on success and outcomes, then it's a very different conversation than, like you said, trust me, if it will work, it will work. No, very, very good. That's a good idea in terms of testing your market, because people go out and sometimes just say, would you pay for this? How much would you pay for this? Yes, they'll pay for it. But it's really having an agreement in place is a big step forward than saying, yes, I will pay for this. It's a very different thing.
And just on that point, and this is something we talk to a lot of people about, is when you're getting a potential customer to trial a product, actually map out what does success look like. Like what is, for the customer to say, yes, I will buy that product, what are the success criteria, and making sure they're really clear before the trial starts. But secondly, have it in agreement that if you hit all of those points, that they will buy it.
Okay.
And it tends to sharpen up these proof of concept things. So you start to, and it's harder to do, because you're really locking the potential customer in. So it's a harder process.
Well, it's a sell now. It's not just giving something away to trial, is it?
Yeah.
It's a very different conversation. But you're going to work with better customers that are actually keen to solve that problem too.
Setting up an agreement to say, this is what we're going to deliver, and it will work for you.
Yes.
And then, you'll remunerate us.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because I see it as a bigger commitment from both parties. You might be just building a product and then say, trial it, see what it's like. If it falls over, that's okay. It's just a trial. But now you're saying, okay, if it falls over, maybe there's implications on our end. But if we actually succeed and prove that we can do this for you, you're committing from your end too. So I think it's a better tangible trial as well. It's not just about, here, try this, and there's buy-in from everybody along it, because we've been involved. We run a startup business ourselves in the pharmacy space. It's a SaaS product. And I think we'll take some of these points away from this because we've put trials in the hands of some people and they haven't looked at it. They said, yeah, we'll do this. This is great, fantastic. And then a month later, they haven't touched it, looked at it. And you think, okay, are you trolling this thing or you're not interested at all? No, we're interested. Just got busy. But I think we all get busy in this world. But if we can, I think that's a really good point to set some goals and objectives in place.
Then, we've got another client that probably share some of these points with. They've done half of what you're suggesting to do. So they went around and canvassed some retail stores in their city because that's who their customers are. And they said they've got 30 people said, yep, they would use it. But there's no agreement in place, I don't think. It's just a verbal saying, we'd use it and we'd agree to that cost. But there's no agreement saying, once we're ready, we'll have 30 customers who are agreeing to pay this and we will provide them with X.
Yeah, it's a very different conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. And where this first came up, it was about 2 years ago, and I was doing some work with some venture capital groups over in the US, and we were talking about, I can't go into the detail, but it was a whole range of different technologies. But we were talking about the biggest problems they were facing, and it was that people kept coming up saying, I'm trialling this product, and here are my trial results. With these 5 customers, and they were saying that they'd been sucked in because they used to believe that, but all that trial was demonstrating was that startup had managed to find 5 people that like playing with shiny new things. That's where they wanted more evidence that around, well, what is success? Was it a successful trial, and did the customer buy it in the end? That's a completely different validation point from a venture capital firm.
It's, I think, very interesting point. I think as the VCs learn through the process too, because years ago they would have accepted, you got 20, 30 people going to pay for it. Awesome. But they learn by experience as well, right? So having something willing to commit is a very different conversation. Like it. Very good insight there. I think that's something we can all take away if we're building products. Get it in the hands of customers, trial it, but have some key outcomes that you're looking to drive and get them to commit to paying something after that trial's finished. I think it's a really good insight in terms of how you can actually trial things better and find probably people that are going to be more interested in the outcome rather than what you said about trialing shiny new things, because they're very different people, aren't they?
Very much so.
No, very good. That's a good point for everyone. So in terms of the next point on your model, proof of concept, so that's a data collection, so that's some things we can do around data. What's next?
With product and service, the business model scalability, the issue is that a lot of people build their business model around rolling something out into Australia, and then they're going to go around the rest of the world. And so because they've actually designed the service or the software or the widget around Australia, it's really hard sometimes to scale it. And so what we tend to talk to a lot of people about is start working out, well, if you were going to sell into Japan, for example, tomorrow, how would you do it? Would you use enterprise over there? How would you do it? And then that actually should be the business model that you're replicating in Australia as well. You might be the ones that are doing the reselling, but you know what I mean? You actually think differently in terms of how this business model is going to roll out around the world. I think
and it's a different tip to what most people might tell you. Start in a small market, understand it and deliver it and trial it.
No, not so much. I agree with that. It's starting in Australia still, and starting with a small market.
Yes.
But it comes back to what we were talking before around validation.
Get it.
So you can validate the business model for Australia, but you're actually not validating a rollout model.
I get it. So you're looking at validating
it's
across
more
it.
operating like you're global, but starting local.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're in Melbourne, you treat Sydney the same as if you would be selling to the US, for example. Like, how would you roll out?
Get it.
In Sydney and Melbourne and other places. And so what you're doing is then validating a rollout model, and it makes it a lot easier to adopt that wherever, rather than saying, oh, yes, well, we can do Sydney, we'll just fly someone up there sort of thing. And
we can do the US, we'll just fly someone up there or employ someone. Yeah, I think in terms of you get a little bit lost around your own world and your own patch, and if you're in Melbourne or you're in Sydney, you're generally going to find customers there. But like you said, overseas are going to have different needs, different regulatory compliance models that we have to consider. So starting in a small patch is generally what people tell you to do, but and starting there, I think that still makes sense. But like you're saying, is now you want to be at the same time exploring what else you need to be doing to ensure your product is fit for purpose nationally and also globally in certain countries you're targeting. Yep. Okay.
Yep. And because we've seen with a lot of business models, they stall because they don't have that approach. We had one client, they're in the mining sector, and they had a sensor type technology, and they were after a lot of accuracy, and so they were sending teams around the world, basically putting these sensors in place in a particular way, and they just couldn't scale the business. It was too expensive. They needed highly skilled people. And so part of what we ended up doing was saying, well, actually, we have to change that business model that you're using, because you just, to scale something like that is just going to be too hard.
Yeah, it sounds human-centric. Yeah, it's a lot of people going to be needed to roll something like that out, which is, in this day and age, we're looking at how we can make things more efficient. But, people are generally not efficient to a business model at the moment.
So that's the other one there. And then, with a lot of the others, in terms of the complexity model, it's around that whole how to mobilize resources. So with that one, a lot of people think funding, rather than understanding what funding can actually deliver, or why startups are going for funding, and it's to mobilize resources. So people are trying to raise money into a startup to either employ staff or resources to conduct product development, or engage someone to do, someone else's resources to do things for you. So it's about resources. And so a lot of people get very caught up on raising money rather than finding resources. So
the money just pays for the resource, right? That's all it does. Yeah.
Correct.
You're not interested in the cash. The cash in the bank's fantastic, but you're going to spend it on something, aren't you?
Yep.
Okay.
So if I say I need to engage someone to build a prototype for me, I've got a couple of different ways that I can approach that. I can raise money, so I can go and pay someone to build that prototype for me, or I can partner with them. And work out a way where there's some, and again, it doesn't always have to be equity. There's a whole range of different models people can use. And it's putting into practice this terrible word collaboration that everyone keeps throwing around. And we see collaboration as actually just mobilizing each other's resources. And
it's exactly what it is, though. You are just accessing resources and collaborating. You're working on together to achieve a certain outcome, and dedicating time and resources towards us. That's it is what it is.
Yeah. So again, we've seen a lot of really interesting ideas fall over because they get very hung up on raising money rather than mobilizing resources, and they just get distracted by the money side.
Yeah, so money's one way to do it, but also partnering with other organisations, Even universities can be a way to approach these sort of things. We've rolled out products with universities in tandem, so just trialing. I don't know if anyone's aware, but you can actually work with student groups to build projects, and generally great for prototypes. And that's, again, mobilising resources. It is a longer game, but if you don't have the capital, that's a way to get things started, to showcase what you're working on. They're going to make things easier once you get 6 months, 12 months down the line. You've got something in your hand that's tangible, that can be working at not the level that you're thinking, but it's something that can showcase what you're doing. It's just another way, and there's many different ways we can find access to resources.
Cost you nothing.
Yeah, it can cost you nothing in some cases, depending on how you approach it.
Yep. No, exactly. And the university one's a really good tip for people to be aware of. We've used MBA teams in a lot of cases where they're doing pretty extensive market research and you've got on uni groups that can do prototyping now and things like that. So there's ways of accessing the resources.
And those resources, they want projects, and they want real life projects. They don't want to be working on a textbook project that doesn't mean anything to anybody. If you think back when you're a uni student, you wanted to be working on things that were relevant to what you're working towards, not just things that were 20, 30 years old. So that's the relevance there.
We've had another client who worked with a university to develop a prototype of their product over the course of a year for no money, and then he ended up getting funding from overseas
based off the back of that.
The concept was proved.
Yeah, and then he would go ahead and then build the real technology. So it is a clever way to do things.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and so a lot of other things around just getting the right management and technical skills on board as they're growing a company and things like that. The other one goes back to what we were talking about earlier on too, about that agile and things, is just reporting.
Yep.
So we see a lot of really interesting ideas and startup companies going off the rails because they don't actually have reporting rigor in terms of this is what we plan to do. This is, what worked, what didn't work. Let's then refocus what were you going to do next. And so whether that's an advisory board or just a couple of sort of, externals that you can bounce ideas off or whatever, we see that as a bit of a problem.
And so you mentioned advisory board there. So I've touched upon this with a few people. What are your thoughts on building an advisory board behind like a startup world or a product that you may be a knowledge industry expert in that space, but you generally don't have all the bits and pieces that a business needs? What are your thoughts on building an advisory team or a team of people around you that can help you push the product forward a little bit quicker?
Yeah, and I think they're good. It comes back to how you use them and how you make them work for you as a business. So I've sat on both sides. I've had advisory boards and I've been on advisory boards.
Okay.
The big thing is you can get free advisors on board.
Yes.
And that works. But always recognise you get what you pay for. So often it very much is an all care, no responsibility, which is fine. They can still provide really good insights.
Yep.
You can get into more paid advisory boards, which is more for larger organisations.
Okay.
And again, you just stack the advisory board with skill sets that you need at particular points in time.
You mentioned you've sat on an advisory board and you also had advisors on your startups. What are some of the key things that people should be looking for? How would they engage with their advisors once they bring them on? Just say, for example, I'm starting up a business. We're in the tech space, but we know nothing about, just say it's the pharmaceutical industry. We go and bring on a domain expert in that space as an advisor. How would we engage them? Would we set up consistent check-ins with them? How would you recommend approaching that?
Yep. So the best ones that I've seen is when you actually treat them as a board and you have 2 or 3 people in the room at the same time.
Yep.
Because what tends to happen is essentially then the management team's reporting on where things are up to. So it's an efficient way of doing that, number one.
Yes.
But secondly, you start to get the advisors bouncing ideas off each other. So you might have someone that's very up on, say, marketing. And you might have someone that's very much focused on product development. But again, getting back to the whole thing has to fit together somehow. So just getting independent marketing advice and independent product development advice generally won't work. You need the combination. So it's better to actually get the groups together in a lot of ways and just have those discussions. And again, whether they're every couple of months or you set a time frame where it adds value, because the purpose is for those people to provide insights to the management team. The role of the management team is then to implement those things if they deem them to be what the company needs.
Understand. So I think the one thing you mentioned earlier was collaboration. So you're looking for your advisors to collaborate on the same objective. So if you've got, like I said, the marketing person in the room and a domain expert in the room, and the marketing person says, let's do this, and the other person says, no, there's a regulatory problem, we can't do that. It's quickly shot in the foot rather than working on a campaign that may not work. So very good insight around working collaboratively. I think, with partners, with advisory boards, and setting up consistent check-ins and treating them like a board, not just a coffee with one person at a time every so often that's not really scheduled or no structure to it.
Exactly.
Having those siloed ideas don't add much value.
No, they don't. You sort of get stuck in the frame of even when we're sharing and spitballing ideas in a brainstorming session, it's great to have different opinions and different perspectives, and everyone's got their own experiences and will give you different insights along that way. And generally, as they say, 2 heads are better than 1, 3 are better than 2, and so on. So you're probably going to create better experiences and better outcomes by having more people in that room, but not too many. We don't want 50.
Oh gosh, no, and it is, and it's changing them around too. And it's what's the key focus of the business now. If it's we're doing a lot of work with universities, and we need someone that really understands the research space, where you get someone on board. After 6 months or 12 months, that may change, and so you get them off the advisory board and you bring someone else on. And so that's the beauty of advisory boards. You can flip people around as you need them. So
and you mentioned there understanding what the business wants for now, and I think the whole model that we're talking about here is all about the now. And then continuously checking in. So checking in on advisors is a good point. Now diving in, I think your next one on the list is the supply chain.
Supply chain, making sure it can actually deliver.
Yes.
So a lot of people, particularly startups, get very focused on what they are doing, not realising that often they're sort of fitting into a broader system. So, if you're needing to use distribution channels, can you use those? So say with food products, a lot of people they'll start off by saying, yep, and we're going to sell into Coles and Woolies and other major supermarkets, without understanding anything about supply chains.
How to actually get into Coles and Woolies, etc.
Correct. And even if that's the way they should be going. A lot of people do, the classic we always come across is we're going to produce this in China.
Everyone says that probably.
And we say, okay, that's great. So who do you know there? How's that all going to work? And if you're doing that, or how's warranty systems going to work? If you're using externals, all of this stuff. Again, looking at it from a system perspective. And how it all comes together.
So would that be going sort of back to your example before with that ag company where they're installing the sensors? If they were outsourcing that to another business, that business has to scale with them. Right. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's not necessarily, that supply chain, like logistics, like you expect, think that comes to mind. It's that workforce has to grow with you for anyone that's a third party that you're relying on to do anything, really.
Yep. No, that's exactly it. And, it's sort of being aware of those. So a lot of people use Amazon Web Services and everything like that, which is great. Not many people ask the question, well, what happens if that all changes? How do we
shift and move? That's an interesting question to ask, because you can lock yourself into those technologies.
A lot of hair pulling and some long nights.
You can. And understanding how not to lock yourself too far in is probably a good thing. You want to be flexible in a business. You don't want to be reliant, and you want to have the ability to change. So they're good questions when you're digging into all different angles.
Yep. And then one of the other ones there is just general sales and marketing. So and this is probably more within larger corporates. We've seen traditional sales approaches being used for early stage, products and services. And a number of times companies have come in saying, "Yep, we've built this new product. Here's all of our marketing material, and this is how we're going to sell this." And we sit there and say, "So, have you done what validation and things like that?" No. We've just built this, and our marketing team have put together all the marketing collateral.
That's ready to go. Yep.
And it's ready to go. And so, again, we've seen a lot of really interesting products and services just fall over because no one's really pulled it up and said, "Well, okay, how do we sell to an early stage customer?"
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Compared to traditional ones, or
Yeah, it makes sense because. You see it all, and that's really diving into a little bit around the standards, around the innovation stuff we were talking about earlier in the conversation, and building those systems in place to allow for that innovation to occur.
And it's more targeting the customer that you're targeting at that point in the curve.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
So it's a different value proposition for the early adopter than it is the late adopter.
Yep.
And the late adopter will come on because the market's proven that the concept works, and then they see, yes, it's been validated, it's been tested, it's not just an idea anymore. There's hundreds, if not thousands of users on this thing or buying this product, whatever it may be, and then they'll come in.
And where an early adopter probably is more towards the dream and the idea of the thing, not the thing itself.
Yeah, they're a different mindset. Yeah.
So it's a different value proposition to market to them. That's why the standard models don't work.
No, it's it. So,
do you find that impacts we're not focusing too much in the corporate world on this podcast, but do you find that the corporate world's generally got their current customers and then they think they're just going to sell something to them, but they don't realize that they made a new product which requires a whole new education and buying cycle, and if it's not proven, they're generally going to jump on board just because they know you. Do you find that is one of the biggest issues that you find in corporate space?
So it's a big one, and linked in with that is they've got traditional selling infrastructure. So they might have salespeople. So what they're trying to do is to use, if you like, the assets that they've got.
Get it.
To try to sell a new product or a service. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it's a case of sitting back and saying, well, actually, if we were starting from scratch, how would we really do this? And sometimes it's a hard thing. And look, at the end of the day, it comes back to business. What makes sense. And from a larger corporate perspective, it's about maximising the value of the assets. And it may not make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but that's... they've been successful. They're still making money and things like that, but they might have to change down the track. The biggest shift we see is when people move from a product-based into a digital service type-based environment, and then often they just need, I suppose, if you like, different business models, different ways of approaching things.
Yeah, because you can't repeat what you've originally done because it just doesn't make sense in that world. And the challenge in that space is there's so much red tape and hurdles to go through to actually deliver upon it. So, interesting conversation. We might share that, have a bit more of a chat about it at a later point. But I love understanding the dynamics of the corporate culture and how they can innovate. And it is a challenge because of the way they do business and the models that exist now.
And it's probably worthwhile mentioning that on the flip side, we spoke earlier on about understanding customers. It's sort of understanding how decisions are made in large corporates, how decisions are made within a supply chain environment, within a government agency. So we come across a lot of startup founders that get very frustrated with working, say, with government.
And how slow it is.
And how slow. But on the flip side, we say, have you ever tried working with a multinational? Because the bureaucracy and the speed, it's pretty much the same.
It's not much difference. It can take it 12 months, maybe more to sign a contract. It takes a lot of time sometimes.
And I think a big thing is for people to understand that that's the operating environment. So don't get frustrated by it. What you need to do is to understand the system and how to work with it. And so sometimes it's a question, it's a case of asking the question, well, okay, we're talking to you about this. Who do you need to convince internally? What information do you need to help get this through your process? And so you're actually working with them because they get frustrated as well.
Oh, they're in that bubble, and they basically want to have things move faster too, like you said. But yeah, that's just the way it is internally. So yeah, whatever you can do to help each other is a good place to start. Now, last thing on the list is wrong or poorly defined problems. How do you, as a business, we can clearly dig in and understand, all right, there might be a problem here, but is that the root problem? So what do we do to actually dig in to understand it a little bit more?
Yeah, there's a pretty simple way to do it, and that's to just ask the question, what causes that? So what we tend to find is that a lot of people see a problem and they focus on that as being, and essentially often it's a high-level problem.
Okay.
So they start to build a product or service solution around that particular that problem area, without understanding what causes that problem. Yes, so a problem is actually made up of underlying problems. And so that's the easiest way we find for people is just to ask, well, we think this is the problem. What causes that problem?
Yeah, that's just a basic, simple way to do that. And I'll dig in a little bit more around what the root cause problem might be.
How we explain it as that's a symptom, not the problem. Generally, when you diagnose it,
yeah, that makes good sense. So this model is obviously something you've built over the last 13 years and put together in terms of a framework. It's something we'll share out with the podcast so that people get an understanding of what it looks like, but some really good content around how people can begin to understand really the complexity of ideas. And that's why we wanted to share this podcast with you, because in reality, we might think, all right, there's a problem here, let's solve it by doing this, and then you start working on it. But none of this other stuff is actually considered until it's probably that far down the tree that, we didn't consider X, Y, Z, or the regulatory challenges, or whatever it may be. And we want to avoid people from doing that. So that's the whole point of sharing what you're doing here. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this today.
Providing this framework and having you discuss it, it's almost like whoever's listening has you as an advisor on board to explain some of these points and get those insights.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to hopefully someone can take and run with and improve what they're doing.
Oh, sorry, I was about to say, look, hopefully it has been of help. Like we've been involved with hundreds and hundreds of startups and technologies, and we like to see everyone succeed. So hopefully this has sort of jogged someone's, thinking around, geez, I haven't checked on this, or maybe I need to go and check on that. And if that's an outcome from this podcast, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. So in terms of Brian, what, just to wrap it all up, I'd like to explore what drives you. Obviously, you've been doing this for a little while. What fascinates you in the industry of innovation, and what are you perceiving as the next 5-10 years, where it's all going? What are you starting to see in the marketplace?
Yeah, so I suppose the thing that really drives me is outcomes and helping to, if you like, develop next generation businesses. So whether that's established businesses that are trying to transform, or whether it's startup businesses or new products and services that are coming to market through, say, licensing deals and things like that. I suppose I've been very fortunate in my career. I've been involved a lot in systems thinking and understanding how to sort of navigate a lot of this complexity, and that's the thing that I really enjoy. Where it's all going is in Australia, compared to a number of other countries, we're maturing fairly rapidly when it comes to, I suppose, not only support structures to support startups and also corporate innovation, but just, I suppose, the number of people that are building skills in the space.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is a lot more, and I know this sounds terrible, but sort of failed entrepreneurs that are coming back for second, third goes at things. And that's really, really important.
The experience that they have, failing, that's that. We need that. The last thing as a failed entrepreneur you want to do is walk away, because you're dropping all that experience that you've paid for, basically. So take that, move forward, and continue to evolve.
Yep. No, that's exactly it. Yeah. And I think what we'll start to find is we're getting more and more people that have got this experience that can impart it onto startups and help them I suppose, get there faster with less risk and things like that. I think the other thing that'll start to happen hopefully in, won't be 5 years, it might be shorter, but it's to start changing some of the, I suppose, the rhetoric a little bit around startups. So there's still a lot of talk about number of startups and amount raised and things like that. Hopefully we'll start to see more of a shift into, the number of new products and services that are in the marketplace, the number of exits that are doing major deals overseas, number of exits, dollars at exit, and things like that. And that's just something that takes time.
Oh, it's a long game. It's not something that's going to take a year. It's a long-term investment into innovation and technology. And in this country, it's pivotal for us to be investing in this space and evolving as an economy. In terms of relying on mining resources is not going to be something that can continue to drive us forward. I think we need to start looking at how we can deliver the next phase of what Australia has to offer. And we're all knowledgeable people in this country, and we've got a lot of expertise, and I think we can deliver more than what we're doing right now. So we're interested to see how it plays out. And in terms of where I'm seeing a lot of investment into technology now. There's a lot of going on, especially corporate world, a lot of startups. There's always new and interesting ideas coming about, and it's becoming like, how long is a business model going to last? Because we're moving so fast. You could roll out a product only maybe last 2 to 3 years and it's gone. So I'm starting to think that maybe we'll end up in a world where we're rolling out different technology that services us for a period of time, similar to like we had a new product in the world of maybe a soft drink, for example, and people liked it for a period of time and then they moved on. And I'm thinking we could end up there, but it will be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. And linked in with it is to get the focus back onto that it's all about business.
Yes.
It at the end of the day, it's about new products and services, and that's ultimately what the end game is. And the more that we have the discussion around outcomes, the better.
Yeah, outcomes are the only way to drive business results, right? Now, just to wrap up, I always like to ask this question. If and you probably have a great way of answering this, you're dealing with a new startup that comes to you, what's the first thing you tell them to do? They've got a concept, they've got an idea, they want to do this. Where do you tell them to start? What generally would be the piece of advice to say to that startup, what do I do now?
Yep. So what we do, we've actually got a process that we use for new startups that come to us. We've got another tool that we take them through. Yes. And it assesses 4 areas. It assesses where they're up to in their technology or their service development area, how much they really know about their target market. Yes. The third one is how much they really know about their manufacturing and distribution. And then the fourth one is how much they really know about their revenue and cost model. Which covers a lot of what we discussed today, doesn't it? So it covers those facets. I think you mentioned this. It's more of like a readiness. How would you rate your business, basically, in terms of where it currently sits? And it's interesting for people to start from there. Yeah. Yeah, and we find it's really useful because what we can do is with that assessment, if they're scoring low numbers, they've got a lot of assumptions, and if they're scoring high numbers, they've got facts. Okay. And what it lets us do is to start to have a conversation around what's the additional data they need to be collecting. So how do they collect more facts? Yes, and where are the gaps? And what's them? Yeah, and what do they need to focus on? And things like that. So that's what we generally do as a kickstart. I'd love to, if you're open to sharing it out to our community as well, if that's something that you're willing to do, just to share out what you're doing in that space. It's very good to how we can help that startup world. Now, I know that you're involved in a lot of things and helping. You're running innovation programs in the Queensland government and doing different things, as well as you've got some training courses. How, if someone's in the frame of, especially in that Queensland little pocket, looking for some help, how do they reach out and find you and maybe jump into some of your programs? Yeah, sure. So, best thing is to go to our website. So it's impactinnovation.com. Yep. So on there, we've got links to, I suppose, a lot of the webinars that we run. We've got an innovation lab which covers, it's not 101 stuff, it's more masterclass around research management, innovation management, things like that.
Not very good.
We've got webinars being run for startup founders all the time, and we run 2 big programs at the moment for the Queensland government. One's called Innovate Queensland and the other's the Female Founders Program. And they've got a combination of, there's a number of face-to-face activities for those that are based in Queensland, but then there's also a range of webinars and online activities as well that anyone can get involved in.
Oh, very good. So, everyone go check out Brian and what they're doing at Impact Innovation, and I'm sure, set you on a good path in terms of your concept ideas from startup right through to corporate. So, thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing your model around idea complexity and how people can find the gaps that they need to fill in and the knowledge that they need to bring in to, take away from the assumptions and move them to facts. Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian, and hopefully we've helped someone today.
Yes, cheers.
Yeah,
Thanks for your time.
With any luck. Yeah, okay, bye-bye.
Cheers. Cool.